For 2 years, his world had been confined to the pages of sketchbooks, each one a chronicle of a face he knew better than his own, yet had never seen in the flesh. So when a violent shadow fell upon her in a desolate alley, he moved without a flicker of doubt, a ghost stepping from the darkness to become her shield. And now, with her vigil at his hospital bedside, he faces the one choice that terrifies him more than death, confessing a love that began long before he ever learned her name. Hello, my beautiful Pride family. It is so good to have you back for another story that I hope will touch your soul. I can't tell you how much your constant support inspires me. It's what fuels my passion to find and share these incredible tales of the heart, and I promise to keep bringing you more as this channel and I continue to grow. And if this is your first time with us, please don't be a stranger. Say hello in the comments and let us know where in the world you are watching from. Be sure to hit that subscribe button to officially join our incredible Pride family. Now take a deep breath and let's dive into today's story. No alarm shrieked Darren Hill from his sleep. He didn't need one. His eyes opened at precisely 5:43 in the morning, as they always did. His very being was a finely tuned instrument, conditioned by 2 years of the same unwavering ritual, the same gnawing hunger and the same quiet desperation that yanked him from his slumber like a line pulling a fish from the abyss. The darkness in his tenement apartment was absolute, carrying a chill unique to poverty, a cold that bled through the thin walls and took root deep within his marrow, a frost no amount of clothing could ever thaw. He had already dressed for the coming day, having slept in a worn hoodie and faded sweatpants, each exhale a ghostly plume in the weak gray light that struggled through a single fractured window pane. For 37 seconds, he remained perfectly still, a silent count he performed every morning, allowing himself to float in the precious void before consciousness came rushing back. Before he remembered the wreckage of his life, before he recalled all he had lost, and before his thoughts inevitably turned to her. Then his hand found his phone. A chaotic spiderweb of cracks marred the upper left corner of the screen. It was a 4-month-old wound suffered when the device slipped from his grasp onto the unforgiving concrete outside the recycling center. The sight of the damage had nearly broken him. Not for the phone itself, a 3-year-old relic that was more glitch than gadget, but because the fracture threatened to eclipse the very portal through which he watched her. He had since perfected the art of tilting it at the precise angle needed to keep the jagged line from cleaving her perfect face in two. He pressed the power button, now enduring the agonizing 10-second eternity it took for the device to flicker to life. His thumb moved with the muscle memory of a zealot, the YouTube app, his search history, and there it was, the video he'd seen yesterday and the day before, and every day stretching into a blur. Alana Casey Monroe delivering her keynote at the Tech Innovation Summit 6 months ago. He had seen it 83 times. He knew the exact number. The video buffered each pixel of victory against his pathetic internet connection. And then the screen resolved, and there she was. Alana Casey Monroe materialized on his fractured screen, wearing a power suit the color of blood and fire that made her deep skin radiate as if she were sculpted from polished mahogany by celestial hands. Her hair was swept into an immaculate bun, but it was her posture that truly commanded attention, an unshakable confidence forged in the fires of building a tech empire before she had even turned 30. She was 29 years old with a net worth of $3.2 billion, and she was without question the most exquisite creation Darren had ever laid eyes on. He carefully propped the phone against the grimy wall and swung his legs from the bed, his hand finding the packet of instant noodles on his nightstand, a cardboard box flipped onto its side. With a flick of a lighter, his small camping stove hissed to life, the sole source of heat in the apartment. He watched her speak as the water slowly came to a boil. Innovation isn't merely about disruption for the sake of it. Alana's voice filled the cold room, clear and strong, and so painfully familiar it hurt. It's about identifying what is fundamentally broken in our world and having the courage to mend it. Darren's own lips formed the words in a silent echo. He had the entire speech etched into his soul. The noodles were ready in 10 minutes. He ate them deliberately, savoring the precious warmth more than the artificial flavor, his gaze never once breaking from her face. On the screen, she was detailing her company's latest initiative, a program designed to deliver tech education to communities left behind by progress. Her passion was a palpable force burning in her eyes and animating her every gesture. The live audience was captivated, and in his frozen apartment, so was he. When the video concluded, he resisted the familiar urge to immediately hit replay. Instead, he set the empty cup aside, reached beneath his thin mattress, and withdrew the sketchbook. It was the single finest object he possessed, a true artist's ledger. It's 120 pages of thick, textured paper, a luxury he'd purchased 2 years ago with the last $23 to his name. He had chosen art over food that week. It was a choice he had never once regretted. He flipped toward the back to one of the few remaining blank sheets. The first 100 pages were a testament to his obsession. They were filled with Alana captured from every angle he could find in photographs and video stills. Alana smiling, a rare, unguarded expression that felt like a secret. Alana in profile, the graceful line of her neck, a curve his hand could now trace from memory alone. And Alana staring directly into the lens, her dark eyes holding an intelligence shadowed by a profound sadness, a sorrow Darren knew intimately, for he saw its reflection in his own mirror. He retrieved his pencil, a cheap mechanical thing he'd lifted from the community center, and set its tip to the paper to draw her from memory. He was chasing a fleeting image from the video, a moment where she'd laughed at a joke from the moderator. Her head tilted back just so her expression completely open for one perfect stolen second. He had replayed that single moment 7 times, dissecting every detail, searing the image into the very fabric of his mind. His hand glided across the page with an architect's muscle memory, a phantom skill from a life he was trying to exercise. The delicate line of her jaw, the arc of her cheekbone, the way her eyes gathered into tiny creases when she was ambushed by happiness. He was in love with her. It was madness. He knew it was madness. You couldn't be in love with a person you'd never spoken to. Someone who was utterly unaware you were drawing breath on the same planet. Someone whose existence was in a stratosphere so far above your own, you might as well have been from 2 different species. You couldn't build a love for a woman out of pixels on a screen, out of sterile interviews, out of analyzing the powerful grace she used to hide a loneliness so profound it was almost visible. But he could see it. My God, he saw it in every smile that didn't quite reach her eyes at some glittering gala. He saw it in every fleeting moment her gaze went vacant while talking to people who only craved a piece of her empire. Yet he loved her with a complete and hopeless devotion, like a monk loves a deity expecting absolutely nothing in return. In 22 minutes, the sketch was done. It was perfect. They were all perfect. The talent was a curse he couldn't shake, even after bearing it under 2 years of penance. Darren's fingertips brushed against the drawing, a ghostly caress along the profile of her face before he snapped the book shut. He slid it back into its hiding place beneath the mattress, a secret too pathetic for the light of day, and then prepared for work. The recycling plant smelled of chemical decay and human desperation. For 18 months, Darren had spent his days here, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, sifting through the city's refuse for just enough money to cover his tiny room and 2 meals if he was frugal. His hands were a tapestry of scars, a history of lacerations from broken glass and sharp metal that were constantly reopened by new wounds. He didn't mind. The pain felt earned. At noon, he took his break on a concrete ledge with Cale Merrick, a 35-year-old man who had survived more years on the street than off it and carried the cynical wisdom of a man who'd seen it all. Cale chewed on a poisson sandwich from the nearby shelter. Darren, meanwhile, was lost in his phone, absorbed in yet another video of Alana. This time it was a business news segment. "You got it bad, brother," Cale observed, his tone more weary than judgmental. He'd been giving Darren a hard time about his fixation for months, not since he'd caught him sketching her on their break. "I know," Darren said, not looking up. He never bothered to deny it. "What was the point? You ever consider, I don't know, moving on, finding a real girl you could actually say hello to?" Darren's gaze lifted from the screen where Alana was deconstructing market forecasts with a brilliance that made his chest physically ache. "Why would I do that?" "Because she has no idea you're alive, man. Because," Cale gestured with the half-eaten sandwich toward the phone, "this isn't real." For a long moment, Darren just watched her speak. "She's real," he finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "And seeing her, just knowing someone that extraordinary is out there in the world, building things and fighting and never backing down, that gives my life purpose. It makes the filth and the cold and this crushing loneliness manageable. Because I can see her and remember that beauty still exists in the world. Goodness still exists." "She exists." Cale shook his head slowly, his expression softening into something like pity. "You've got the heart of a poet in the body of a garbage man. It's going to destroy you someday." "I'm already destroyed," Darren replied softly. "She just lets me feel alive for a little while each day." The buzzer signaling the end of their break cut the conversation short, and they went back to the sorting line. But Cale's words haunted Darren for the rest of his shift. It was true. Loving Alana was a slow-motion execution, the way all beautiful things kill you with exquisite, merciless precision. but he'd been dead since Isabel died. This at least was a better class of haunting. That evening, Darren was at the Riverside Community Center teaching art to kids who were born into the same poverty that now defined his life. It was the single piece of his old self he permitted this link to creating to beauty, to the idea that something whole could be made from broken things. There were 12 kids in his class tonight from ages 7 to 14. Every one of them carried their trauma around inside their little bodies like soldiers carry shrapnel. Darren laid out the donated supplies, which were never quite enough, and gave them a single instruction: draw whatever you need to. He didn't teach technique. He provided a space for them to exercise the feelings that words couldn't touch. A 10-year-old girl named Maria was working quietly beside him on a portrait of her mother. The girl had a gift. Her lines were confident and sure, far beyond her years. Darren watched her, offering a quiet suggestion, only when asked, mostly just sitting with her in a comfortable, shared silence. Darren, she murmured without looking up from her sketch pad. Have you ever been in love? His hand froze the piece of charcoal he was using for his own drawing, hovering over the paper. It was a compulsion to draw alongside them. Yes, he said. With who? With someone who doesn't know I exist. Maria finally looked up at him, her dark, serious eyes looking far too old for her face. That sounds lonely. A faint smile touched Darren's lips, an alien feeling on a face that had forgotten how. It is. Does it hurt? She asked, her voice insistent. No, he replied, and it was the honest truth. It actually makes me grateful. She tilted her head. How come? Because caring for her even like this, from worlds away, knowing it can never be. It's a reminder that my heart isn't broken. It proves I can feel something besides this hollow ache. She is like a single lamp burning in a pitch-black room. I know I can never get close enough to feel its warmth. I can't hold it in my hands, but just knowing it is there, that is enough for me. Maria absorbed his words with the profound gravity only a child can muster for life's great mysteries. I think that makes her very lucky, she concluded after a moment. To be loved that much by someone, even if she has no idea, that is a special thing. A lump formed in Darren's throat. He reached out, giving Maria's shoulder a gentle squeeze. Just keep drawing, he managed to say. Your mom will absolutely love this. After class, he lingered, helping tidy up the room and then escorting a few of the younger students to their bus stop. A bitter November wind cut through the air, signaling winter's premature arrival in Washington, D.C. He cinched his worn-out jacket closer to his body as he started the walk home, idly wondering if he should swing by the corner store. A quick mental check confirmed he had $4.30 to last him until Friday. Maybe it was enough for... His feet suddenly stopped moving. In the window of an electronics shop, a wall of televisions flickered, all tuned to the same channel. And there on the main display was Alana. She was at some high-profile gala, draped in an emerald green gown that was so sleek, so stunning, it was almost painful to look at. She was a constellation in it. He noticed her hair was down, cascading in dark waves across her shoulders. Standing next to her was a man handsome in the way that only old money can be, impeccably tailored, perfectly coiffed, and utterly forgettable. The text crawl at the bottom of the screen named him as Samuel Crane, her fiancé. It was not news to Darren. He had known for 8 months, ever since the official announcement. He remembered watching that press conference, seeing her flash a practiced smile while reciting all the perfect lines about partnership, shared vision, and lifelong commitment. He had watched the entire thing and felt a strange sort of numbness. Of course she was engaged. It was inevitable. Of course she was building a flawless life with a man who belonged in her orbit, someone from that world of galas and headlines. But that did not change a thing for him. It did not diminish his love for her, not one bit. It did not lessen the ache of wanting her. He simply loved her the way one loves the sun from a great distance, with the full understanding that getting any closer would mean being incinerated. But seeing her on that screen right now, noticing the almost imperceptible distance she kept from the man beside her, the carefully constructed smile that never touched her eyes, he saw a loneliness in her that was a perfect reflection of his own. A familiar crushing weight settled in Darren's chest, tightening around his lungs. I have watched you from afar for so long, he whispered to her image on the screen, that the thought of ever standing near you feels like a dream I am terrified to even have. His words were lost to the city noise, a futile message he knew would never reach her. He caught the eye of an employee inside who was looking at him as if he were unhinged. Maybe he was. Shaking his head, Darren finally turned and walked away into the night. Back in his apartment, he fumbled with the bottle of anxiety medication. his hands trembling so much he nearly dropped the single pill he managed to shake out. The plastic rattle confirmed his fear it was nearly empty. Getting a refill was a whole other problem. The free clinic was swamped, the wait list was 3 months long, and he had already been stretching his prescription for weeks. He tossed the pill to the back of his throat and swallowed it dry, then collapsed into bed, pulling a single threadbare blanket up to his chin. Just before sleep claimed him, he unlocked his phone for one last look at the picture he had saved just hours before. It was a candid shot of Alana exiting her office building. Her head was bowed, her features unguarded for a rare moment, and the profound sadness in her expression was enough to shatter his heart a second time that night. "Good night, Alana," he murmured to the glowing screen, the words spoken with the quiet reverence of a prayer. Just 3 miles away, in a sprawling penthouse with a commanding view of the Capitol, Alana Casey Monroe stared out her floor-to-ceiling windows, drowning in a solitude so complete it was devastating. Her home was beautiful, but it was the sterile, lifeless beauty of a magazine photo shoot, impeccable, untouchable, and freezing cold. Every single item was designer, exorbitantly expensive, and meticulously curated by an interior decorator she had hired to build a home that screamed success. The couches were Italian leather. The paintings were originals from artists whose names were investments. The panoramic view itself was worth millions. She despised it all. She stood there wrapped in silk pajamas that had cost $800. She held a handmade ceramic mug of coffee, gazing down at the waking city below. Thousands of tiny lives buzzing to life, small, complicated, beautifully real lives. And she would have traded places with any one of them in a heartbeat. Her phone vibrated on the counter. It was Elo, her assistant, with the day's itinerary. 9 meetings, 2 conference calls, a working lunch, a mandatory charity dinner, an exact replica of yesterday. And tomorrow would be the same. And the week after, a relentless repeating pattern stretching into a future where she would die, successful, accomplished, and completely hollow. She pressed her palm flat against the window, feeling the chill of the glass leach the warmth from her skin. It was not just a pane of glass separating her from the world below. It was a fortress built of money, fame, and the impossible pedestal they had all placed her on. A pedestal she had climbed herself willingly and desperately in a frantic attempt to prove her own worth after her mother's death. Had left her with nothing more than a massive trust fund and the bitter certainty that love was fleeting, but success was permanent. But she had been wrong. Success was not permanent, it was just lonely. It was a gilded cage with a breathtaking view and no one to share it with. Success for Alana had to face her fiancé, whose kisses were exercises in affection, always on the cheek, and always leaving her feeling utterly numb. Alana squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back a wave of tears she neither understood nor had the luxury to indulge. The board meeting was in 2 hours. Perfection wasn't just expected, it was her armor. It was her identity. She often wondered if anyone saw the cracks beneath the flawless orphan. That night's obligatory business dinner was at Le Diplôme. It was a monument to expensive French cuisine, a stage for the wealthy to perform their appreciation for culture. Across the table, Samuel dissected merger strategies and social calendars, the cold, hard architecture of their relationship. He was undeniably handsome, fiercely intelligent, and socially impeccable. Born into the right family, he navigated her world with ease and never asked for more than the curated version of herself she offered. On paper, he was flawless. The Henderson acquisition should be finalized by January. Samuel remarked, his knife gliding through a fillet with surgical precision. "Your uncle is concerned about the public perception." "My uncle is always concerned." Alana countered the food on her plate untouched. She never had an appetite at these events. "He means well." "He means to control," she corrected softly. Samuel finally looked up, his gray eyes analytical. "You know, you could always tell him no." "That's easy for you to say." The bitterness in her voice was accidental, but it hung in the air between them like a toxic fog. They concluded their meal in a practiced, comfortable silence, the kind born from a long friendship, which is all they had been before the engagement was brokered. They were friends whose lives aligned on a spreadsheet. When he escorted her to her car, he performed his usual ritual, a gentle chaste kiss on her cheek. "Good night, Alana." "Good night." She waited until his car disappeared before slumping into her own, her fingertips tracing the spot his lips had grazed. An absolute void, no warmth, no spark, no connection, just the lingering scent of his cologne and the crushing weight of obligation. She wept on the drive home and hated her own weakness for it. Darren was never supposed to be in that part of the city. He'd taken a late shift at a community center clear across town, filling in for a sick co-worker, and had stayed long after talking a scared kid through a brutal panic attack. By the time he locked up, it was nearly 10 at night, and the last bus that ran anywhere near his apartment had long since departed. So he started walking. It was 14 miles. He'd walked farther before. The farther he got from the city's gleaming center, the more the streets decayed. The polished veneer of gentrification gave way to the forgotten wards, the ones politicians remembered only in election years, with empty promises of revitalization. With his head down and hands buried in his pockets, Darren pictured Maria's drawing the fierce pride on her face as she showed it to him, the way her eyes lit up when he'd told her it was a masterpiece. His thoughts drifted from there to Alana. He replayed the interview he'd watched on his phone during his lunch break that morning. She had spoken about building a legacy, something that mattered more than profit margins. Her voice had been electric with passion, and in that moment he had fallen for her all over again. He was so lost in that memory he almost walked right past the car. A sleek black Mercedes, looking as out of place on this street as a diamond in a sewer. It was pulled to the curb, its hazard lights blinking like a faint, desperate pulse. As Darren drew closer, he could make out a woman in the driver's seat, her frame rigid with stress. His first instinct was to just keep walking. 2 years of grinding poverty had taught him a harsh lesson. Inserting yourself into other people's problems was the surest way to multiply your own. But then he heard the engine try to turn over, sputter, and die. He saw her fist slam against the steering wheel, and in that same instant, he saw that a group of men had noticed her too. There were 5 of them materializing from an alleyway like ghosts. Darren recognized their type on sight: opportunistic predators who preyed on anyone they perceived as weak. The leader, a man Darren knew by reputation as Revik, hefted a crowbar. They began to fan out strategically surrounding the car. Darren's heart began to hammer against his ribs. This wasn't his business. This was how people got killed in this part of town. He told himself to keep moving. Inside the car, he heard the sharp click of the door locks. One of the men rapped the crowbar against her window, a casual, terrifying tap. The others chuckled. Darren took 3 more steps, trying to will his feet to carry him away. Then the woman turned her face toward the sound. A streetlight caught her features, and Darren's world came to a screeching halt. Not 50 feet away, trapped and looking terrified, was Alana Casey Monroe. Darren's body reacted before his mind could even process the command. He shoved his way through the small crowd of onlookers that was beginning to form, people drawn to the spectacle of impending violence, and he stepped directly between the circling thugs and her car. "Leave her alone," he said. His voice shook, but his stance was firm. Revik turned, his expression shifting from surprise to predatory amusement. "This your woman?" "No," Darren replied, "but she isn't yours either. Walk away. You walk away, hero, before you get hurt." Darren didn't move an inch. He couldn't. Not when Alana was right there, the woman he'd quietly adored for 2 years. The woman who gave his gray, faded life a reason. And now she was surrounded by men armed and ready for violence. Every protective instinct he possessed was screaming, a stark contrast to his 6'3", 160-pound frame that hadn't seen a real fight since high school. "I'm not leaving," he said, the tremor in his voice gone. Revik's smile evaporated. "Your funeral." The first blow came in a blur, the crowbar swinging in a vicious arc toward his ribs. He saw the blow coming and tried to twist away, but his body was a clumsy, untrained thing, and the force of the impact stole the breath from him in a searing flash of agony. He collapsed, the sound of his knees striking the asphalt sharp and final. A voice in his skull was screaming, "Get up! She's in danger! You have to get up!" And somehow he obeyed. The next strike was a clubbing blow to his shoulder that sent him reeling. A third punch split his lip wide open, and his mouth instantly filled with the coppery tang of blood and the bitter taste of his own inadequacy. Yet each time he was knocked down, he forced his broken body back to its feet, positioning himself as a human shield in front of Alana's car door. Through the thick glass, he could hear her terrified, high-pitched screams, distorted and distant. He could just make out her frantic voice on the phone pleading for the police. All he had to do was give her a little more time. A vicious kick to the gut folded him in half. Another to his spine threw him face first onto the ground. The world dissolved into a smear of light and shadow. His ribs felt like a cage of fire, and every gasp for air was pure torment. For a fleeting second, he saw Isabel's smiling face just before the crash, then the sudden horrifying emptiness in her eyes. He had been behind the wheel that day. He had failed her. That failure had cost her life. He refused to fail Alana. He rose again. Revik was no longer toying with him. The man produced a knife, its blade winking in the lamplight, and a primal fear colder and sharper than the steel itself shot through Darren. But he held his ground, swaying and bleeding, the only thing standing between the blade and the woman he adored. "You've got to be either the dumbest or the craziest bastard I've ever met," Ravik sneered. The knife lunged forward in a swift, merciless arc. Instead of retreating, Darren lunged into the attack, a desperate gamble that made the blade tear across his side rather than pierce his heart. The pain was a blinding, white-hot nova, and he finally went down for good, the sound of distant sirens wailing through the haze. "They're getting close. It's the cops." "Time to go," one of the thugs yelled, and they vanished into the night like vermin, leaving Darren crumpled in a rapidly darkening pool of his own blood. He registered the sound of a car door being thrown open, the frantic patter of footsteps on pavement, and then the delicate, trembling touch of small hands on his face. "Oh my God, oh God, please, you have to stay with me." Darren struggled to open his eyes. One was already swollen shut, but through the other he saw Alana Casey Monroe kneeling over him, her tears falling onto his cheeks like warm rain as her hands framed his ruined face. She was really touching him. She was here. She was safe. You're Alana," he breathed, the words forming on their own, his mind too fractured to think of anything else. "Do you have a phone? Is there someone I can call for you?" She sobbed, her voice breaking. Why, why would you do something like this? Why would you throw your life away? "You are going to be okay. Do you understand me? You'll be fine. Just please, please keep your eyes open." He wanted to tell her everything. That he loved her. That he had been in love with her for 2 years. That to die right here feeling her touch on his skin was a greater gift than he had ever dreamed of, but his voice was gone. A heavy, insistent darkness was tugging at the edges of his consciousness. "Worth it." He forced out the sound little more than a bloody whisper. "You were worth it." Her face was the very last thing he saw as the world faded to black. Alana cradled the stranger's head in her lap, feeling something that had been locked away inside her for years shatter into a million pieces. His warm, sticky blood was seeping into the fabric of her expensive dress. His face was a brutal canvas of bruises and swelling, almost unrecognizable as human. She had never seen him before, had no idea what his name was. Yet he had just endured a beating that would surely kill him. He had taken a knife that had been meant for her, and in that moment she felt something so foreign she had almost forgotten its name. Connection. This broken, bleeding man had looked at her as if she was worth more than his own life. The ambulance screamed onto the scene in a disorienting blast of noise and flashing lights. When the paramedics tried to move her aside to get to him, she fought them. She actually clawed at them, her voice raw as she screamed that she would not leave his side. "Ma'am, you have to let us work." "I'm not leaving him." They transferred him onto a stretcher, his body utterly limp, his breathing dangerously faint. She overheard one of the medics muttering about massive internal bleeding, about catastrophic trauma, about how little time they had. Alana trailed them to the ambulance in a complete stupor. "Are you a relative?" a paramedic asked her. Yes, she lied, the word leaving her lips without a hint of hesitation. It was enough to get her inside. She huddled in the cramped rear of the vehicle as they moved with frantic efficiency, her hand clutching his, the only part of him she could reach. His fingers were rough with calluses and marked with old scars. They were the hands of a man who fought hard for every little thing he had. They were exquisite. "Does he have a name?" one of them asked, fumbling for a wallet that contained almost nothing. Just a couple of dollar bills and an identity card that had expired 4 years ago. "What difference does it make? Just save him." Alana screamed, a wave of hot shame washing over her. This man had just saved her, and she didn't even know his name. At the hospital, they rushed him directly into an operating room. Alana was left standing alone in the sterile hallway, covered in his drying blood, watching the doors swing shut behind him. And for the first time in 8 long months, she didn't think about her fiancé. She didn't think about the critical board meeting the next day. She forgot about everything in her life, except for one all-consuming, terrifying certainty. If that stranger died, a vital part of her would die along with him. 2 hours later, Eloan found her in that exact same spot, a statue of grief still drenched in a dead man's blood. "My God, Alana, what happened to him?" She breathed, her voice a hollow echo. "I need a complete file. I want to know everything." "I mean it. Who is he? Where does he crawl out from? Dig up every last secret," she ordered just as the 6-hour surgery finally concluded. His lung was perforated, his abdomen filling with blood, ribs shattered, his brain rattled inside his skull. The surgeon's words were a grim litany. Catastrophic blood loss. The next 24 hours were a razor's edge, and she needed to go home. She remained anchored to her chair in the waiting area. Ello appeared like a ghost, bearing a change of clothes, steaming coffee, and her laptop. In the sterile bathroom, Alana scrubbed the crusted brown of his blood from beneath her nails, watching the pink water spiral away, feeling as though she were erasing the proof of something vital. They moved him to a private wing only after she demanded it, settling the exorbitant cost without a second thought. The money was meaningless. He seemed terribly small and fragile in the clinical expanse of the hospital bed, his face a canvas of bandages, his torso tightly bound, surrounded by the steady rhythmic chorus of machines. But he was breathing. Alana dragged a chair to his side and sank into it, her gaze fixed on him, searching his battered features for an answer. He was younger than she'd registered in the violent chaos of the attack, perhaps in his early 30s. Even through the swelling and deep purple bruises, there was a profound gentleness to his features, an elegance in the structure of his face. An unconscious impulse drove her hand forward to smooth a stray lock of dark hair from his brow. She snatched it back as if burned. "Who are you?" she mouthed to his still form. The silence was his only reply. Still, she stayed. Over the next 2 days, Samuel's name flashed on her phone 17 times, and 17 times Alana let it go to voicemail. Elo became her fortress, deflecting her business appointments, clearing her schedule, and delivering quiet updates on the stranger who had thrown his life in front of hers. His name was Darren Hill, 32 years old. He was once an architect, but his certification had expired 4 years prior. His current job was at a recycling plant. His address was in the city's poorest district. There was no family, no one to call in case of emergency, no social footprint to speak of. The man was utterly, terrifyingly alone. A knot tightened in Alana's chest as she absorbed the meager details Elo had managed to unearth. It couldn't be everything. People don't just materialize out of thin air. But Elo swore the trail stopped dead. 4 years ago, it was as if Darren Hill had decided to cease to exist. On the third night of her vigils, exhaustion finally claimed Alana, and she drifted off in the chair, her laptop resting on her lap. A subtle warmth woke her at 3 o'clock in the morning. A blanket had been draped over her. A kind nurse, probably. The hospital was hushed, the world reduced to the soft chime of monitors and the low hum of the ventilation system. Her eyes fell on Darren, still submerged in unconsciousness, still in the fight for his life, and she began to speak. "I have no idea if you can even hear me," she whispered. "They say some people can when they're in this state, but maybe that's just a story we tell ourselves so we don't feel so completely powerless." She hesitated, the words feeling alien and foolish in the sterile air, but a deeper need pushed her onward. "My name is Alana, though I suppose you must have known that if you were trying to save me. Everyone seems to know who I am. It's profoundly lonely in a way. To be a name on everyone's lips, but a stranger to every soul." The admission hung in the air, startling her with its raw honesty. "I built this entire company to prove I was worthy after my mother was gone. Everyone told me I couldn't, that I was too young, too fragile, too ruled by my heart. So I carved all that out of myself. I became steel. I became flawless. I became a winner. I made every single one of them eat their words. But this empire is my cage now. I can't recall the last time someone touched me out of affection instead of as a means to an end." A sharp, bitter laugh escaped her lips. "I'm about to marry a man I feel nothing for. I have acquired everything I had ever convinced myself I wanted, and most nights, the loneliness is so vast I feel like I'm suffocating." Her gaze fell to his hand, which lay still on the white blanket. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out, placing her own hand beside his. Not quite touching, just sharing the space. "They told me your name," she whispered, her voice thick. "But who are you really? I can't go until you open your eyes. I have to know. I have to understand the kind of person who would sacrifice themselves for a complete stranger. Because sitting here with you these past 3 days, I've felt a calm that has eluded me for the last 3 years of my life, and I can't make sense of it. None of it." In the deep quiet of the pre-dawn room, while his mind remained lost to the world, Darren's fingers twitched, brushing against the side of her hand. The contact was feather-light, almost imaginary. Alana's breath caught in her throat, her pulse kicking violently against her ribs. Then just as quickly, his hand went slack again, retreating into stillness. But the connection had been made. In the silent hospital room, holding the hand of a man she barely knew, Alana felt a fracture in the wall of her solitude. Darren returned to consciousness through a haze of softness, light, and blinding pain. The pain hit first, a tidal wave of pure agony that surged through every cell, confirming his survival. Nothing dead could hurt this much. A fire burned in his chest. His face felt like a stranger's, broken and remolded. A brutal drumbeat pounded in his skull, perfectly in time with his racing heart. He fought to open his eyes. One slit obeyed. The other was swollen completely shut. The room was all wrong. It was too sterile, too luminous, too opulent. For a brief, disoriented second, he wondered if this was the afterlife, a sterile antechamber to judgment. All pristine white walls and blinking technology, and the sharp, clean scent of antiseptic instead of fire and brimstone. And then he registered the flowers. The room was drowning in them, towering arrangements of roses and lilies. They were crammed onto every flat surface, their cloying perfume making the air heavy and hard to breathe. A sharp, cold spike of panic shot through him. The room screamed money, the kind of place that came with a bill he couldn't settle in 3 lifetimes. He tried to push himself up, but a blinding shot of pain threw him back against the pillows, a sharp gas tearing from his lungs. He had to get out of there before the crushing weight of the debt did more damage than Rubik's crowbar ever could. His hand fumbled desperately for the call button. That's when her voice cut through the fog. "Mr. Darius, I frankly don't give a damn what the board considers appropriate. Cancel the meetings. We are not having this discussion again." Darren froze. That voice, he knew that voice intimately. He'd spent hundreds of hours listening to it on video clips and interviews and speeches he had practically committed to memory. But hearing it in person was a world apart. It was deeper, filled with textures his phone's speakers could never replicate. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head and saw her through the gap in the doorway. Alana Casey Monroe was standing in the hall, phone glued to her ear, dressed down in jeans and a plain sweater he'd never seen in any of her public photos. Her hair was carelessly pulled back into a messy ponytail. She looked exhausted. She looked exquisite. She looked real. She was right there. She was actually impossibly here, 15 feet away from him, fighting with someone over staying at this hospital. Staying for him. It all came rushing back. The car, the assailants, the brutal beating, her face hovering, his streaked with tears, her hands pressing on his wounds. He had protected her. He had actually managed to save Alana Casey Monroe. And now she was here while he was stuck in a paper-thin hospital gown, certain his breath smelled like the grave. Oh God, no. This was absolutely not how any of this was ever meant to happen. Alana stabbed the end call button with a finality he could hear from across the room. She stood frozen for a second, her frame rigid with tension, then turned to come back inside and their gazes locked. In that impossible moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Her eyes widened and her lips parted in shock, and Darren found he couldn't draw a breath, an issue that had nothing to do with his punctured lung. "You're awake," she breathed, the words fracturing as she spoke them. She scrambled to his side, placing a coffee cup on the table, her hands hovering uncertainly above him, wanting to make contact but hesitating. "Are you in pain? Do you want me to get a nurse?" "How are you feeling?" Darren tried to form a word, but his throat felt like sandpaper. She saw his struggle, instantly snatching a cup of water from the nightstand. She brought it to his lips as her other hand slid behind his head, supporting him with a gentleness that undid him completely. The raw intimacy of the act made his heart seize in his chest. Her hand was cradling the back of his head. Her face was only inches away. She smelled divine, and he was just drinking water. She was helping him drink, and it was without a doubt the most sensual moment of his life. He took 3 small sips before leaning back, breathing heavily. "Thank you," he rasped. "No thank you," she replied softly, placing the cup down, but not retreating an inch. Her composure finally shattered, tears pooling in her eyes. Darren just stared at her, overwhelmed. "Why are you still here?" She looked at him as though he'd just uttered the most foolish thing imaginable. "Where else would I be? You were unconscious for 4 days. I wasn't leaving until I saw you wake up. 4 days. There were surgical complications. It was bad. It was really, really bad." Her voice was trembling now. "You could have died." He attempted a smile, only to feel his split lip tear open again with a wince. She drew a steadying breath. Her hand rested on the bed beside his, close enough for him to feel her warmth. "I'm Alana," she said, stating the obvious. The absurdity almost made him laugh, though he was fairly certain the act would kill him. "I know who you are," he said, his voice a low whisper. "Everyone knows who you are. What's your name?" He had never wanted to lie so badly in his entire life, to be someone else, someone worthy of the intense way she was looking at him. But he was a terrible liar. "Darren. Darren Hill." "Darren," she repeated, and the way the name sounded coming from her made him feel like he could actually be someone worth knowing. The way she said his name caused an ache deep in his chest that had nothing to do with his cracked ribs. You should go. He forced out the words, inflicting more pain than any of his injuries. Your fiancé must be worried, and I have to deal with how to pay for all this. Her expression hardened into something fierce. Everything has been taken care of. Every bill, all the treatments, everything. You don't owe a single penny. I can't accept that. You don't have a choice. It's done. It's not a topic for discussion. She shifted to sit on the edge of his bed, so close, he could feel the pressure of her hip against his leg through the thin blanket. He could smell the clean scent of her shampoo. I need you to stay, Darren. Not for any reason of debt or duty, but because... She paused as if gathering her nerve. Because in 4 days of just sitting here with you, I've felt more at peace than I have in 3 years. And I need to understand who you are. Why you did it. I need to. The door suddenly swung open and a man strode in. He wore an expensive suit. His hair was perfect, and he had the kind of curated handsomeness that required personal trainers. Samuel Crane. Darren recognized his face from the news. Alana finally... Samuel's voice was smooth and warm, but edged with exhaustion. I've been trying to reach you for days. His gaze then landed on Darren, his expression shifting to one of polite, detached concern. He approached the bedside, hand extended, then pulled back, noticing the true extent of Darren's injuries. He offered a simple nod instead. So you're the one, the man who saved my fiancé. Samuel Crane, I'm in your debt. That one-word fiancé hit Darren like a body blow. Darren's features immediately went blank. A mask he'd perfected growing up with nothing. You never let them see your hope, because it was the first weapon they'd use against you. Congratulations, Darren said, his voice quiet. She's one of a kind. For a split second, something unreadable flickered in Alana's eyes. It might have been disappointment or even regret, but Samuel was already steamrolling the moment, talking about the attack, about security protocols, vowing it would never be repeated. His gratitude was flawless, professional, and carried the polite, detached air of a wealthy man thanking the hired help for doing their job. Darren let the words drone on, feeling the vast, uncrossable chasm between his world and Alana's stretch into an infinite, desolate space. Of course she was engaged. Of course a woman like her lived a perfect life with a perfect man. Of course the connection he'd felt, the way she'd looked at him as if he mattered, was just charity, pity for the man who'd saved her. Nothing more than that. We really should get you to the Wella, Samuel was saying to Alana. You've been holed up here for days. It's time to get back to your life. But Alana looked at Darren, her gaze searching his for some kind of signal. I'm fine, Darren interrupted, his voice completely flat. You should go. Thank you for everything. The finality in his tone was unmistakable. The light in Alana's face dimmed, but she gave a slow, reluctant nod. Samuel's hand rested possessively on the small of her back, steering her toward the exit. Darren watched the woman he was falling for walk out of his life, certain it was for the last time. She paused at the threshold, turning back. I've arranged for your aftercare, she said, and a place for you to stay. You can't, she hesitated. You can't go back to that neighborhood. It isn't safe. You don't have to do that. I know, but please consider it a thank you. She fished a card from her purse, crossed the room again, and placed it on his nightstand. My personal number, if you need anything at all. Her fingertips grazed the back of his hand as she set the card down, and a jolt of pure electricity shot up his arm, sharp and undeniable. Their eyes locked, and he saw her breath catch, watched her pupils flare, and recognized the exact same shock of connection dawning on her face. Then Samuel called her name from the hall, shattering the moment. And just like that, she was gone. Darren was alone again in the sterile, expensive room, staring at that small piece of cardstock as if it were a holy relic. With a trembling hand, he picked it up, clutched it to his chest over the agony of his broken ribs, and finally let himself break down. 2 weeks later, Darren was discharged to an apartment Alana had rented for him. It was a simple one-bedroom in a safe part of town, but compared to the slum he'd come from, it felt like a palace. It was fully furnished, the kitchen was stocked, and the rent was paid 6 months in advance. The shame of accepting such a handout was at war with the overwhelming relief of knowing he had clean sheets and hot water. He found a job at a local community center teaching art to at-risk kids. The pay was almost nothing, but it nourished a part of his soul that had been starving for years. Then Alana texted him. It began simply enough. How are the ribs? He stared at her name on the screen for 20 solid minutes before he typed back. Better. Thank you for this place. I don't have the words. A few days later, she sent a photo of an enormous coffee spill across a polished Desk. The caption read, "Morning meetings should be a criminal offense." He actually laughed out loud. He texted back a reply without thinking. And soon the text became their new normal. They exchanged good mornings, sent photos of odd things they saw throughout the day, and traded memes that became their own private jokes. The formality between them dissolved, and they started to truly talk. Alana vented about impossible board members and the crushing pressure of running an empire she inherited too young. In return, Darren told her stories about the kids from the center. He described their incredible resilience, their raw creativity that blossomed against all odds. Inevitably, she began asking about his past. He always deflected, not yet able to speak of Isabel, of the accident, of the suffocating guilt that had pushed him into a life of poverty. He turned the tables asking why she drove herself so hard. She admitted she didn't know how to stop. That achievement was the only currency of self-worth she'd ever been taught. Their late-night conversations began to stretch longer and longer. One night, they messaged for 3 straight hours, talking about everything from architectural styles to their secret childhood ambitions. Neither of them pointed out how wildly inappropriate it was. An engaged woman sharing this level of intimacy with another man. But neither of them could stop. One evening, 3 weeks after his release, Alana just showed up at the community center completely unannounced. Darren was leaning over a 13-year-old's shoulder demonstrating perspective drawing when he heard that unmistakable voice from the doorway asking if a Darren Hill worked there. His head snapped up. There she was, walking into the noisy paint-splattered in a sharp business suit looking like something out of a dream that had just crashed into his reality. The chaotic energy of the room died instantly. Every kid stopped what they were doing and just stared. "Miss Monroe," Darren choked out, getting to his feet so fast that his healing ribs sent a sharp protesting pain through his side. "What on earth are you doing here?" he asked, stunned. "Oh, I was just in the area," she replied, a fib so blatant it was almost endearing. Her office was clear across the city. "I wanted to see the place you work," she confessed, and a chorus of whispers erupted from the children. Every single one of them recognized her. Her fame cut across all social strata. As Darren made the introductions, fighting to keep his voice from trembling, her warmth instantly won them over. She inquired about their art, studying each piece with genuine interest and offering praise that was both thoughtful and specific. Her questions revealed she was truly listening, and the children were utterly captivated. She ended up staying for the entire 2-hour class. She settled onto a stool beside Darren at the paint-splattered table, their shoulders brushing against each other in the close quarters as she watched him teach. He was acutely aware of every single point of contact, the accidental graze of her arm against his, the soft hitch in her breath when he leaned over to get a better look at a student's drawing. "You have a real gift with them," she whispered when the kids were lost in their projects. "They listen because you have a way of making them feel seen." Darren turned to answer and was struck by the sudden lack of distance between their faces. She was 6 inches away, close enough to see the tiny flecks of gold in her brown eyes, to count her eyelashes, to feel the warmth of her breath on his skin. "The moment you walk into a room, everything else just fades away." He said the words tumbling out before he could catch them. "My history, my baggage, it's all gone. There's just you." Her eyes grew wide, her lips parted, and for a single suspended heartbeat, he was sure she was about to close the gap between them. "Mr. Darren," a small voice piped up, shattering the moment. "Is Miss Alana your girlfriend?" They sprang apart as if they'd been shocked. Alana let out a nervous, awkward laugh he'd never heard from her before. "Oh no, sweetie," she said. "We're just friends." But the word friends sounded fragile and unconvincing on her lips. When the class was over, Darren walked her to her car in the now empty lot, the November evening air sharp and cold. A single streetlight cast a solitary, intimate glow around them, creating a private world in the darkness. "Thank you for letting me crash your class," Alana murmured, lingering by the car door, neither of them making a move to say goodbye. "You're welcome any time. The kids absolutely adored you." A heavy silence stretched out thick with everything they weren't saying. Darren shoved his hands into his pockets to stop himself from reaching out to her. "Can I ask you something?" Alana finally ventured, her voice small. "Anything. Do you ever regret it saving me? Do you ever wish you just kept walking?" The question floored him. He moved closer on pure instinct, his answer immediate and fierce. "I would do it again 1,000 times over." The raw conviction in his voice made her eyes glisten with tears. She reached out, squeezing his hand for a brief moment, her fingers a surprising warmth against his icy skin. The contact was brief, but it was enough to set them both alight. She pulled her hand away, abruptly fumbling for her car keys. "Right," Yeah, of course, he muttered, running a hand through his hair distractedly. She slipped into the car but didn't start the engine right away. She just sat there, her hands clenched on the steering wheel as Darren stood in the cold watching her through the windshield. Finally, the engine coughed to life and she drove away. For 20 solid minutes, Darren stood motionless in that parking lot, staring at the hand she'd touched, the ghost of her fingers still electric on his skin. He knew with a crushing certainty that he was falling deeper in love with a woman who would forever be out of his reach. 3 weeks into this newfound friendship, Darren felt like he was falling apart. Loving Alana from a distance had been a form of self-contained torment, painful, but a fantasy he could manage. But this was different. Knowing her, being near her, the daily texts, seeing her smile in person, hearing that laugh, it was all revealing her to be infinitely more extraordinary than he could have ever imagined. It was the most exquisite kind of torture. He laid awake night after night, his mind replaying every moment. The look she gave him in the art class, the way her breath hitched when their shoulders touched, the impossible pressure of her hand in his for 2 fleeting seconds. He was losing his grip. Alana was attending a charity gala with Samuel, one of a dozen such obligatory appearances they made each year. The designer gown she wore, which cost $20,000, felt more like a costume than a dress. In his own meticulous way, Samuel was attentive, ensuring her champagne glass was never empty and introducing her to donors and politicians with a polished, effortless grace. They shared a dance not out of desire but out of obligation. His hand on her waist was perfectly polite, impeccably appropriate, and utterly devoid of any passion. When the music stopped, he placed a gentle kiss on her temple. "You seem somewhere else tonight," he remarked. "Sorry, I've just had a ton of work this past week." It wasn't exactly a lie. She was utterly exhausted from the performance, from smiling at people who saw only her inheritance, from wearing a ring that grew heavier with each passing day, from the crushing weight of wanting to be anywhere but there, of wanting to be with Darren. At 2 in the morning, buzzing from champagne and feeling desperately alone in a room full of people, Alana excused herself and made the call. He answered on the third ring, his voice raspy with sleep but sharp with concern. "Alana, what's wrong?" Just hearing him say her name was a physical ache in her chest. "Nothing's wrong. I'm so sorry I woke you." "Don't ever apologize for that. I would wake up for you any time." The simple, unwavering sincerity in his voice nearly shattered her composure. "Where are you?" "Some gala," she said, letting out a bitter laugh. "I would rather be at that community center with you and those kids than anywhere else in the world. The hours I spend with you are the only time I actually feel like myself." The rustle of bed sheets told her he was sitting up. "Alana, I dreamt about you," she confessed, the champagne dissolving her inhibitions. "You were drawing my portrait, and in the dream you told me you loved me." She held her breath, her pulse hammering in her ears. "And in my dream, I said it back." The silence that answered her was a physical weight. When Darren finally spoke, his voice was a ruined whisper. "And what if it wasn't a dream, Alana? What would you want then?" Alana squeezed her eyes shut, her body sagging against the wall outside the bathroom as tears began to slide hot and silent down her face. The truth was a physical pressure in her throat fighting for release. "This is just a friendship," she pleaded with herself. But the lie had worn thin. "I would say the very same thing, Darren. I would choose the man in my dream over the life I actually have. And I am so scared because I have never ever felt this way." She heard his sharp, ragged gasp of air, a sound that was almost a sob just before his own voice broke through the static. His voice trembled with an emotion he's made no attempt to hide. "I've loved you since before I even knew the warmth of your skin. And now that I do, you've ruined me for anyone else. Every time you look at me, I forget how to breathe. And I don't ever want to remember. You aren't just in my heart, Alana. You're in my blood. You're in my bones. You're in every single breath I take. You're everywhere." "Alana," Samuel's voice sliced through the moment like a shard of glass. "Are you ready to head out?" She recoiled from the wall, her tone shifting instantly, becoming sober and cool. "I have to go." "Alana, wait." She ended the call. She stood there trembling as Samuel waited 10 feet from her, holding her coat. The phantom of Darren's confession was a ringing in her ears. She had just stepped over a line from which there was no return, and she couldn't find an ounce of regret in her heart. Sleep was a country Darren could not find his way back to after the call. He lay awake, staring into the darkness above his mind, replaying Alana's words, her voice so fragile and broken and true, admitting she felt it too, that she would pick him over her picture-perfect life. that it terrified her. He was terrified too because his entire connection to her was founded on a lie. Not a spoken one, but a lie of omission, which felt infinitely more dishonest. In her mind, their story began the night he came to her rescue, but he had been hopelessly in love with her for 2 years before that moment. He had watched her, studied her, rendered her face from memory dozens of times before they ever exchanged a word. She had to know what really happened. She deserved the entire story. Even if it painted him as some kind of obsessive fanatic, even if it made her turn and run, honesty was the only thing that mattered. At 7 o'clock in the morning, his text went through. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Her reply appeared 3 minutes later. "Yes, when today, please." She named a secluded park by the Potomac River, a place that would be quiet. They agreed on 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Darren spent the hours that followed in a state of carefully managed panic. He took 3 showers and tried on 4 different outfits, desperately trying to find a combination that didn't scream poor but also didn't look like he was trying to be someone he wasn't. He ultimately chose jeans and the one good sweater to his name, a gray pullover with elbows that were just beginning to fray. He grabbed the sketchbook, the one chronicling his obsession, his devotion, his 2 years of loving her from an impossible distance. He slid it into his backpack. The park was almost a ghost town when he got there, the bitter December chill having chased everyone indoors. Alana was already there, a solitary figure by the water's edge, in a long black coat, her unbound hair whipping in the wind. She looked anxious. She looked absolutely breathtaking. "Hi," she said as he got closer, and her voice held a tremor of uncertainty that was entirely new to him. "Hi," he replied. They moved in silence for a time, their feet following the winding path beside the river. The water was a choppy, unsettled gray mirroring the sky above. Darren's heart was a drum against his ribs, so loud he was certain she could hear it. At last, he stopped beside a bench that overlooked the restless water. "Can we sit?" She nodded. As they sat, a careful foot of space remained between them, a distance that felt like a canyon. Darren took a steadying breath and began to speak. "I need to tell you something about the night I found you. About everything before that night." His hands were shaking, so he clasped them together tightly. "It wasn't a coincidence. Me being there. I mean, your car giving out was just bad luck, but me recognizing you, me deciding to step in, that was..." He couldn't meet her gaze. He stared at the river, forcing the confession from his lungs. "I've been watching you for 2 years. Not like a stalker. I never followed you, nothing creepy, I swear. But on the news and interviews, I watched your speeches, your public events. It began because I saw you on television and was just captivated by how brilliant you were. The way you spoke about innovation, about purpose. It was the first thing that made sense to me when nothing else in my life did." He risked a glance at her face. She was listening, her expression impossible to decipher. It grew into something more than just admiration. "I have this sketchbook. I would draw your face from memory or from screenshots I'd take from videos. Over and over. I know how completely insane that must sound. I know, but you gave my life a purpose when I was completely lost. Just the knowledge that someone as incredible as you was out there in the world was enough to make the hardship and the solitude feel less crushing." From his backpack, he retrieved a worn sketchbook, setting it down on the bench that separated them. "Inside this book are 147 sketches of you, all done before we ever spoke a word. For 2 years, Alana, I loved you without ever knowing the feel of your hand. And that night, seeing you trapped in that car with those men, I didn't have a single coherent thought. My only instinct was that I would burn the world down to keep you safe." He finally lifted his gaze to meet hers. Silent tears were carving paths down her cheeks. "I'm telling you this now because this lie, this mission, it's become unbearable. These last few weeks, actually getting to know the woman I'd only admired from afar, it has been the most exquisite and agonizing time of my life because you are infinitely more than I ever dreamed. Every single talk, every message, every shared glance with you feels like my first breath of air after being held underwater. And I can't maintain this facade of friendship when my world grinds to a halt every time you offer me a smile." His voice fractured with emotion, but he pressed on. "I am completely, hopelessly in love with you. I know the timing is a catastrophe. I know you belong to someone else. I realize I have no claim on you, but the deceit is eating me alive. You had to know what was real. And if you tell me to go, if this confession is too much to bear, I will vanish from your world. You'll never hear from me again. I just You have a right to see the real me before you make any choices. The silence that followed his declaration was a suffocating weight. Alana remained motionless, a statue with tears streaming down her face, the sketchbook lying like a bomb between them. Then with a sudden jolt, she was on her feet, turning from him and wrapping her arms around her waist as if to hold herself together. He watched the tremors run through her shoulders. Darren felt his heart splinter into 1,000 pieces. He'd miscalculated. He'd laid his soul too bare. He'd terrified her with the sheer force of his feelings. "I'm so sorry," he managed, his voice a hollow echo. "I never should have. I'll leave." "No." Her response was a strangled whisper. She spun back to face him, her expression shattered. "Don't you dare apologize. And don't you dare leave. Just grant me a moment. My mind I can't make sense of this." She paced a few feet away, her breathing deep and ragged as she fought for composure. Darren stayed seated on the bench, convinced he was a man awaiting his own execution. When she finally returned, her eyes were swollen, but her tone was firm. "You don't get to say things like that to me. You don't get to tell me you've been in love with me for 2 years, that you have a book filled with my face, that being with me is like being rescued. Not when I'm walking down the aisle in 6 weeks, not when my future has been meticulously arranged, and not when this powerful thing between us has no right to exist." "I'm aware of that," Darren replied softly. "It's why I offered to disappear if that's what you need." "I don't want you to disappear." The admission tore from her, raw and desperate. "That's the entire problem. That is the cruelest part of all of this, because I feel it too." She sank back onto the bench, but this time she was closer, so close, their knees were almost brushing. "I've been fooling myself, telling myself this feeling was just a debt of gratitude, a simple friendship. But your face is the first thing I see in the morning and the last thing I see at night. I find myself searching for a message from you before I even think to check my work emails. Being with you feels like finding a home I never knew I was searching for." With hands that shook, she reached for the sketchbook and opened it to the first page. The drawing was dated 2 years prior, one of his initial attempts. It was Alana at a podium, her expression a mask of intensity and focus. She navigated the pages one by one, watching herself unfold through his perspective, a testament to his obsession captured in lead and charcoal. "I'm so scared," she whispered, her gaze still lost in the drawings. "Because my life is supposed to be with Samuel. He's the logical choice, the safe choice. But when you look at me, it's the first time I've ever felt truly seen. As if you're looking past the fortune and the title and the persona. You just see me." She gently closed the cover and finally raised her eyes to his. "What are we supposed to do now?" The pressure in Darren's chest was so immense he could hardly draw a breath. "I have no idea. I'm not demanding that you end things with him. I'm not demanding that you pick me. All I needed was for you to have the truth. Is there any reality where we get a chance?" Her question was so faint, it was nearly lost to the air. "You deserve a man who looks at you as if you are the center of his universe." Darren said, his voice brimming with a fierce conviction. "I can be that for you. In my heart, I already am, but I come with nothing but who I am. I have no money. I'm a collection of broken pieces. I'm living in a place you're paying for because I can't even cover my own rent. Any kind of life with me would be unpredictable and chaotic, a world away from the one you've built." "Your money means nothing to me," Alana insisted. "I need you to believe that. None of it matters, but I have responsibilities, legal agreements. This engagement is tied to corporate mergers and family legacies. It isn't something I can simply walk away from." "I understand. I need time," she pleaded, her eyes begging him to comprehend. "Time to speak with Samuel, to unravel what is real from the life I was conditioned to want. To see if there's any path forward that doesn't result in total devastation for everyone involved." "How much time?" "I can't say for sure. A few weeks, perhaps longer." Would you be willing to wait for me?" "I would crawl through embers, endure 1,000 cuts, and live out 100 destitute lifetimes for the smallest chance of being loved by you." Darren confessed, his words raw and stripped of all artifice. "I will wait for as long as it takes." Alana's hand found his, her fingers weaving through his own, a silent promise. The contact was a jolt, a current of pure shattering truth that coursed through every inch of him. There, by the murmur of the river, they held on, two souls weeping in the quiet twilight. The chasm between them had finally vanished, yet the path forward was a landscape shrouded in fog. A full week passed in absolute silence. 7 days stretched into an eternity. Not a single text from Darren, not one call from Alana. They were suffocating in the space they'd given each other, each one screaming on the inside. Darren buried himself in his work, a man trying to outrun his own shadow. He took on every extra class, signed up for shifts at 3 different community centers. Anything to fill the hours and leave him too broken by nightfall to think. But it was useless. Each night he stared into the darkness, haunted by the memory of her hand in his, the fragile hope swimming in her eyes and the crushing gravity of the weight. Cale saw the cracks forming. Man, you look like you've been dragged through hell backwards. When did you last eat? This morning, he lied. It had been yesterday afternoon. You're letting this woman tear you apart. I know. Is she really worth all this? Darren's mind flashed back to 3 weeks ago, to Alana's laughter echoing in his empty apartment after he sent her a ridiculous meme after midnight. He saw her with the children in the art class, how she truly listened to them, and he heard her voice confessing that being with him felt like she'd finally found her way home. Yeah, he breathed the word of certainty. She's worth everything. Alana, for her part, was just as broken. She drifted through meetings, her temper was short with her staff. Her entire world had lost its focus. On the 5th day, Elo cornered her. All right, spill it. What is going on with you? You've been a ghost all week. Alana's gaze met her assistant's, her friend, and the dam finally broke. I'm in love with someone, she choked out, and it's not my fiancé. Elo's eyes went wide, but there was no shock there, only recognition. It's Darren, isn't it, Alana? I've been your assistant for 4 years. I've never not once seen you look at Samuel the way you look at that man. Elo dropped into the chair across from her desk. So the only question that matters is, what are you going to do? I don't know. The engagement. It's not simple. The board, my uncle, they engineered this. There are legal agreements. Agreements can be terminated. People's expectations aren't your prison. Elo leaned in, her voice low. Do you love Samuel? The question was a blade hanging over her head. No, Alana whispered. I care for him deeply, like a brother, but there's no spark, no real desire. I said yes to him because it was the logical choice, because he was comfortable, because it pleased the board, and I was so tired of being by myself, and he was there. That is not a foundation for a marriage. I know. Alana buried her face in her hands. I know. I have to call him. I have to stop this now. Even if Darren and I are impossible, I can't walk down the aisle with this lie in my heart. Then call him. With trembling hands, Alana found her fiancé's contact and pressed the button. Samuel, can we meet tonight? There's something. We need to talk. His voice on the other end was strained, but there was an unmistakable note of relief in it. Yes, actually, I need to talk to you too. There is something I should have told you 5 years ago. They agreed on a quiet restaurant for the evening. Samuel insisted on driving. His own car was being serviced, so he had borrowed Elo's SUV. He would swing by and get her since she lived close to the restaurant. Alana told them she would just meet them there. The entire afternoon was a torturous rehearsal of the words she would use, trying to find a gentle way to shatter a good man's heart, to tell him she couldn't marry him because she belonged to someone else. There was no kind way to say it. At 6:30, she slid into her car and pulled out into the evening traffic. At 6:42, Samuel blew through a red light. His mind was a world away, caught in the web of his own confession, the secret he had carried for half a decade. He never even saw the truck. The sound was a symphony of violent steel tearing glass, atomizing the world, reduced to a screeching, tumbling wreck. Elo's scream was cut short in the passenger seat. The airbag was no match for the force that threw Samuel's head into the steering wheel. The universe canted sideways in a final deafening roar of annihilation. Then a sudden dead quiet, pierced moments later by the wail of sirens. Darren was on his way home from the center when the flashing lights painted the sky 3 blocks ahead. He could see smoke coiling into the twilight. It was the familiar, structured chaos of an emergency response. A small crowd was forming. He almost kept walking. Wrecks like this were a daily tragedy in the city. It had nothing to do with him, but some unseen force made him stop, made him look. He saw the SUV, a mangled ruin. He saw them pulling Elo from the passenger side, bloodied, but awake, her screams tearing Samuel's name from her lips. He saw the frantic dance of paramedics around the driver's door, where the collision had been most brutal. And then he saw it, the third car, a black Mercedes whose license plate was burned into his memory from countless news reports. Alana's car. The warmth in his body vanished. The world thickened each second in agonizing crawl. He was moving before he even realized it, a desperate surge through the onlookers, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm of pure unadulterated terror. Not again. Not her. Please God, not her. The name was a raw, broken sound torn from his soul, Alana. He broke through the police tape just as they reached her vehicle. The driver's side caved in and saw her motionless, collapsed against the steering wheel. Her hair was a tangled mess of crimson and brown. She was terrifyingly still. Her eyes shut against the world, and every nightmare he'd ever had about Isabel came roaring back to life. The wreck from 4 years ago, the precise moment the light had vanished from Isabel's eyes. The memory of his own voice, raw and useless, screaming her name, while the medics gently explained it was too late. The sickening sight of his own hands coated in her blood, and the crushing weight of knowing he'd been driving. Not again. Please God, not again. He clawed at the mangled car door, his grip slipping on the twisted handle, a primal terror giving him inhuman strength. When a police officer tried to restrain him, Darren threw him aside with a ferocity he never knew he had. With a final agonized groan, the door gave way. He reached inside his hands, shaking so violently they were barely under his control, and with infinite care he tilted her head back. Her eyelids fluttered. The wave of relief was so powerful it almost sent him to his knees. Alana. Darren. Her voice was a faint, slurred whisper. What happened? You were in a wreck. I'm getting you out of here. Just hold on. With clumsy, fumbling fingers, he released her seatbelt, then slid his arms underneath her, pulling her securely against his chest as he lifted her from the wreckage. A small cry of pain escaped her lips, and the sound nearly shattered him. He carried her clear of the twisted metal and collapsed to his knees on the harsh pavement, rocking her gently as his own tears fell onto her face. Paramedics swarmed them, but he wouldn't let go. He couldn't. His arms were a vice locked around her with the irrational hope that if he just held on tight enough, he could physically shield her from death's grasp a second time. Sir, we have to examine her. I'm not leaving her side. His voice was a ragged, broken thing. You can't. Darren. Alana's hand floated up weakly, finding his cheek. It's okay. Let them help me. The words ripped out of him, a raw confession he couldn't hold back. I am so terrified of losing you. But I'm even more scared of never telling you that you're the reason I ever thought I could have a second chance. When I saw the car, when I thought you might be gone, I just can't lose you. You won't, she breathed. I'm here. I'm all right. It took 2 paramedics to physically pry his arms from around her so they could begin their work. He stood 3 feet away, his entire body racked with tremors, watching them check her vitals, stabilize her neck, and transfer her to a stretcher. The second they started for the ambulance, he moved to follow. Are you family? A medic asked, blocking his path. Yes, Alana said, her voice thin but unwavering before anyone else could speak. He's mine. Let him come with us. And so they led him into the ambulance. He sat beside her gurney, his hand gripping hers like a lifeline while his other gently stroked her hair, a tenderness that was a world away from the violence he'd shown earlier. You're going to be okay, he repeated endlessly, the phrase becoming a desperate mantra. You're fine, I've got you. When I hold you, it feels like I'm holding everything that matters, and I will protect it with every last thing I am. At the hospital, they moved to separate them for triage. Darren reacted with a feral desperation, his eyes wild, reaching for her as a wall of nurses blocked him. Sir, you need to let us do our jobs. I need to stay with her. Darren, please. An older nurse with calm, kind eyes placed a firm hand on his arm. Son, you're scaring everyone. She's in good hands now. We will take care of her, but you need to calm yourself. His breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. He was on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. The trauma of Isabel was bleeding into the present moment, blurring the lines until he couldn't distinguish the then from the now. The nurse firmly guided him into a chair and pushed him down. She made him lower his head between his knees, coaching his breathing in a low, soothing voice, filling the air with meaningless chatter until the frantic drumming of his heart began to slow. Once he could think clearly, again, she brought him a cup of water and told him that Alana had a severe concussion and a fractured collarbone, but was expected to make a full recovery. She was stable. She was safe. The words broke through his terror, and Darren buried his face in his hands and finally truly sobbed. They allowed him to see her 2 hours later. She lay in a hospital bed, head bandaged, an arm in a sling, looking so small and breakable that his chest physically ached. But she was alive. He approached her bedside on trembling legs and just stood there, watching the simple, miraculous rise and fall of her chest, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, the undeniable proof that she was real and she was here. Hey, she whispered, trying to offer a smile that was more of a wince. Hey, his own voice was completely wrecked. You saved me. Again, always he swore, his voice thick. I will always save you, no matter how many times it takes. She reached for him with her good arm, and he took her hand, perching carefully on the edge of her bed. They told me about Samuel, she said quietly. 2 broken legs, some internal injuries. He's in surgery now, but they're optimistic he'll recover. Eloin only has a fractured arm. Everyone is going to live. I'm glad, he said, and felt a wave of relief that it was true. Despite everything, he didn't wish real harm on any of them. I was on my way to end my engagement. When it happened, Alana confessed, her eyes searching his face for a reaction. I had already made my decision before the accident. I choose you, Darren. I'm choosing love over obligation. I'm choosing this terrifying, uncertain journey with you over the safe, predictable life I had all planned out. Darren opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. His throat had sealed shut. He lifted her hand to his mouth, his tears tracing paths across her skin as he kissed her knuckles. There's something I have to tell you too, he choked out. It's about why I completely lost it when I saw your car. A ragged breath escaped him, and then he began to speak of Isabel. He spoke of the woman who had been his closest friend 4 years ago, and of the crash, the one where he was behind the wheel. He told her how she was gone while he had walked away, and how the guilt became a cancer devouring him from the inside until he threw it all away, his career, his fortune, his entire existence, because he couldn't imagine finding joy after causing the death of the woman he held so dear. I ran away to D.C. I had to get away. He confessed, each word a fresh wound. I needed to become a ghost, to just dissolve into poverty and anonymity, because it felt like my penance. And seeing your wrecked car today, for a second I was right back in that nightmare. It was that same paralyzing terror of losing another woman I love, this feeling that my very presence in someone's life is a destructive force. With her good hand, Alana framed his face, compelling his gaze to meet hers. This was not your fault. Not what happened to Isabel, and certainly not this accident. You didn't orchestrate either of them. And love is not a curse, Darren. You have been my savior twice now. In these few short weeks, you've brought more into my life than I've known for years. You are anything but cursed. You're the most courageous, beautiful soul I know. I have nothing to give you, he whispered back, the words barely audible. I'm barely holding on. How am I supposed to be a partner to someone when I can't even put my own life together? Everything I possess I would trade for you, Alana declared, her voice burning with conviction. But he just shook his head because he had nothing. So I am offering you the only thing that has any value in my entire heart for as long as you will have it. A broken, watery laugh escaped Darren through his tears. I'm pretty sure that was my line to say. Then tell me. Say everything. Don't hold anything back. He shifted closer, gently resting his forehead against hers, ever so careful of her injuries. You could have your pick of anyone, kings, moguls, men who could promise you the entire world. But not one of them will ever love you the way that I do, completely, desperately, and for all time. The very sound of my name on your lips makes me think I could be a man worthy of being loved. You are worthy of so much more than you could ever comprehend. He closed the distance, then his kiss tender and cautious and utterly flawless. He tasted the salt of their shared tears on her warm lips, a flavor of hope and new beginnings, of everything he believed was buried forever when Isabel died. When they finally drew apart, he pressed his forehead back to hers and murmured, I don't need a lifetime. Just give me tonight and tomorrow and every single moment you're willing to share. I promise to make everyone count. You already have. An hour later, Elo rolled herself into the room, her arm in a cast and a bandage on her forehead, but her eyes were sharp and lucid. Her gaze fell upon Darren and Alana. His hand wrapped around hers, their faces inclined toward one another, and a knowing smile bloomed on her face. Well, it's about damn time, she quipped. A laugh escaped Alana, but it caught in her throat, transforming into a wince of pain. How are you holding up? Like I was in a car wreck, but I'm breathing, so I guess I'll take it. Elo's lightheartedness vanished. Samuel pulled through the surgery. He's stable. But Alana, he was on his way to tell you something critical. He made me swear that if he didn't make it, I would get the message to you. What message? Elo's eyes flickered toward Darren, a moment of uncertainty on her face. Maybe this should be private, he stays. Alana stated, her voice firm as her hand tightened around Darren's. Whatever this is, he can hear it too. Samuel wanted you to know that he understands. He's seen for weeks that your heart was going to someone else, and he said he's thankful for it. It gave him the courage to face his own truth. Alana's brow furrowed. What truth? He told me to say he is deeply sorry for not being honest from the start, that the engagement was a terrible mistake, and that once he recovers, he has a confession to make that changes absolutely everything. 2 days later, Samuel was finally cleared for visitors. Alana went into his room while Darren waited in the hall, giving them their space but staying close enough for her to feel his silent support. Samuel was propped up against his pillows, his legs immobilized in casts, looking utterly drained, but possessing a strange sense of peace. When Alana started to stammer an apology to explain about Darren, he simply held up a hand. Stop, I know. And I have to tell you something I should have admitted 3 years ago. He drew a deep breath and then the words came tumbling out. I'm gay. For the last 5 years, I have been in love with someone else, a man in London named Jasper. Our engagement was never real. It was a formal arrangement. The statement hit Alana like a physical blow. She sank into the visitor's chair, her mind reeling. What Samuel's voice was gentle yet resolute. After your mother passed away, your uncle and the board started to pressure you to settle down to project an image of stability. They were threatening to push you out of your own company. You must remember, they were going to weaponize your history with anxiety and depression to paint you as an unfit leader. And she did remember. That nightmarish month after her mother's funeral, when she could barely function, and Chris had convened that emergency board meeting where they'd challenged her stability, her judgment, and her very right to control the empire she had built from scratch. I presented you with a solution, Samuel continued. A marriage of convenience. I could provide that stable, respectable facade they were looking for. It was the only way to safeguard my inheritance. My family, they're from the old world, staunchly traditional. The moment they learned I was gay, I would have been cast out, left with absolutely nothing. We had engineered a comfortable, sterile life for ourselves. A union of two lonely people seeking refuge, both of us hiding from who we truly were. Samuel's eyes held a sad, resigned clarity. But then the assault happened, and I witnessed you falling for Darren. I mean, truly irrevocably falling. It was like seeing a light flick on inside of you, a vibrancy I had never known you possessed. I heard you laugh from your soul, not the polished, hollow performance you reserve for galas. I watched you prepare to burn your entire world down just to sit by his hospital bed. And in that moment, I knew we weren't building a safe life. We were condemning each other to half-lives. Silent tears streamed down Alana's face. Why didn't you ever tell me? His reply was a whisper of pure cowardice. Because the lie was so much simpler than the truth. Because I fooled myself into thinking safety was enough. He tried to shift in the bed, his face tightening in a grimace of pain. But the accident coming that close to death, it gives you a brutal kind of perspective. I am done pretending. I am done being someone I'm not. The engagement is over. I'm telling my family the truth. I am going to fight them and live honestly, Alana, even if it strips me of everything I have. And you need to do the same. Fight for your company and fight for your love. Stop letting other people dictate the terms of your existence. A genuine, unburdened smile finally touched his lips. Go get your man, Alana. It's painfully obvious that Darren is madly in love with you. Honestly, his brand of heroic devotion is almost infuriating. A laugh escaped Alana through her tears. She leaned in, embracing him with exquisite care, mindful of both their injuries. I'm so profoundly sorry you ever felt you had to hide, he said softly. And I'm sorry that I was part of the cage you were in. As she wheeled herself back into the corridor, Darren was on his feet in an instant, his expression etched with 1,000 anxieties. She propelled the chair toward him, and he met her halfway, dropping to his knees to hold her as she leaned into his embrace. I'm free, she breathed into his chest. Completely free. The engagement was never real. It was a fortress, not a romance. And Samuel just tore it down. She pulled back, her eyes searching Darren's face. It means I can be with you. Really, truly be with you. If you'll still have me. He answered with a kiss, one that was deep and certain and perfect right there in the sterile hospital corridor. Let the nurses stare. Let the whole world watch. This was real. She was his, and he was never letting her go again. 1 week later, against the strict advice of her doctor for light duty, Alana returned to work. She promptly ignored the recommendation and called for an emergency session of the board. The tension in the conference room was suffocating when she entered. The sight of Darren beside her sent a ripple of whispers through the room. She had brought him deliberately, a calculated move to make them witness her allegiance. Her Uncle Chris sat enthroned at the head of the table, a smug, predatory look on his face. He'd clearly heard about the broken engagement. He thought he held a winning hand. Alana, we need to discuss our concerns regarding recent events, he began. Your broken engagement, this erratic behavior. He shot a look at Darren, his disdain barely veiled, and the questionable company you are now keeping. Alana's voice was pure ice. We've done our own due diligence on Mr. Hill, a formerly licensed architect who lost his entire practice 4 years ago. He currently lives in poverty, has a documented history of mental health challenges, and a deceased fiancé whose death occurred under rather suspicious circumstances. Chris opened a folder and slid a set of glossy photographs across the table. Public records from the accident that killed Isabel, followed by copies of Darren's medical records, helpfully highlighting his prescriptions for anxiety. He is an unstable drifter, Alana, and your entanglement with him calls your executive judgment into serious question. The board members shifted their expressions, a mix of sympathy and calculation. We are therefore invoking the clause from 3 years ago, Chris announced, questioning your mental fitness to lead. Your recent behavior, the failed engagement, this unhealthy obsession with this man, it all points toward a dangerous instability. We are giving you 1 week to make a decision. You can step down voluntarily or we will force a vote to have you removed. The room plunged into silence. Slowly, Alana rose to her feet, her eyes blazing with defiance. You want to question my fitness, the fitness of the woman who built this company from nothing. Fine. Let's talk about fitness. Let's talk about turning a $5 million investment into a $3 billion empire before I turn 30. Let's talk about our market share, our innovation pipeline, or our best-in-class employee satisfaction ratings. She leaned forward, her hands pressed flat against the polished wood of the table. Or would you rather talk about the fact that I've fallen in love with a man who can offer me nothing of material value? Is that what truly makes me unfit in your eyes? That I choose love over your approval? Chris's face hardened into stone. You're thinking with your heart, not your head. That is precisely what has us concerned. Darren had been a ghost until this moment, silent at her side, trying to will himself invisible. But hearing himself used as a weapon against her, feeling the raw contempt from everyone in that room, something inside of him finally broke. He stood. You're right, he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the dead air. Every eye in the room snapped to him. I have nothing. I live in an apartment that she pays for because I don't earn enough to cover the rent. I work at a community center for a salary that barely keeps me fed. I have a past that haunts me and a trauma that I am still fighting my way through. He looked at Alana, then his voice softening. But I love her more than I have ever loved anything or anyone in my entire life. And she makes me want to be better. She makes me want to build things again, not just hide. To create, not just survive. He turned back to face the board. If loving a woman for her soul instead of her stock portfolio is a weakness, then I am the greatest weakness she's ever known. But you will not use me to burn down her world. I would walk away from her this instant if it meant she could keep everything she's fought for. Not a chance. Alana's voice was a blade. She moved to his side, her hand locking with his. You are not going anywhere, and neither am I. Her eyes swept across the boardroom, cold as steel. This board is being dismantled and rebuilt. Anyone who entertained this motion to question my authority is gone. Challenge me, and I will leverage every asset I have to take this company private. My life is not a negotiation. That's impossible, Chris stammered. I can, and I will. This company is mine, built with my blood and sweat, and I am finished living half a life to please men who view me as a line item on a balance sheet. The doors swung open. Samuel entered, guiding his own wheelchair, his lawyer at his side. She's not bluffing. And I am here to state for the record that our engagement was a strategic alliance, not a romance. I stand with Alana unequivocally. Moreover, I am fully prepared to testify that Chris attempted to blackmail us both, threatening to create a scandal, unless we maintain the public facade for financial gain. Following him was Eloan, her arm in a sling, clutching a heavy-looking portfolio. I also possess documented proof of Chris's illegal access of Alana's confidential medical records, his back-channel deals to manipulate board votes, and his private correspondence detailing strategies to control her decisions, all of which are actionable criminal offenses. The climate in the room shifted instantly. Board members who had been sitting on the fence now looked utterly betrayed. One man stood fixing his gaze on Chris. I signed on to back a genius, not to take part in a coup to control her private life. My investment was in her brilliance. This is a disgrace. 3 others nodded in solemn agreement. Chris shot to his feet, his face a mask of crimson fury. You are all making a colossal mistake. This corporation needs stability, not some pathetic love affair. Then you should leave, Alana said with chilling calm. Because I am not going anywhere. He stormed from the room with two of his loyalists trailing behind like beaten dogs. The remaining board members exchanged uneasy glances before turning their full attention to Alana. What do you require of us, the eldest of them asked. Your faith. And the freedom to run my company while living an authentic life. Can you grant me that? The vote was 7-0. She had won. Alana found Darren later in the hallway, collapsed on a bench, his head in his hands. She sat down next to him, taking his hand in hers. You didn't need to do that for me, she said, her voice soft. Offer to vanish. Yes, I did. I will not be the reason you lose everything you've built. You aren't the reason I would lose anything. You're the reason I had the strength to keep it. She gently turned his face to look at her. They kissed right there in the corridor outside the boardroom, where she had just gone to war for the right to love him. It felt like absolute victory. The final reconvened board meeting took place 1 week later. With Darren watching from the front row, Alana stood before the investors, the press, and her new board. She was about to give the defining speech of her career. I founded this company to prove I was worthy of something after my mother died. I wanted to build value to show everyone I was more than just a grieving girl, more than the world's low expectations. Her voice resonated with unshakable conviction. But I have finally come to realize that my worth is not defined by this company. It is innate. I do not have to earn the right to exist or to love or to be happy. The chamber was utterly still. I am in love with a man who has endured hell and emerged with his gentleness intact. A man who gives everything he has not in terms of money, but in everything that truly matters. He inspires me to be a better person, to create things with a purpose that goes beyond profit margins, and to remember the dream that started all of this. She turned her focus back to the board. So you can choose to support all of me, my personal life included, or you can choose to leave. But I am done negotiating my own humanity. 3 more board members resigned right then and there, unable to accept her ultimatum. The rest remained. For the next 48 hours, the press was savage. Billionaire CEO forfeits empire for destitute artist. The opinion pieces practically wrote themselves. Social media ignited with a firestorm of judgment. Alana tuned it all out. She was far too occupied with falling deeply in love. 6 months later, Darren stood before a building that symbolized a new beginning. It was his first major architectural achievement since Isabel's death, a memorial arts center funded by Alana's foundation, and born from his design, it was magnificent. 3 stories of glass and light created open spaces meant for creativity, for community, for emotional healing. His own hands had drawn every single line. His vision was in every beam and window. He named it the Isabel Memorial Center for Arts and Hope. Alana stood at his side during the opening ceremony, their fingers intertwined. She had delegated most of her day-to-day corporate duties to lead their philanthropic efforts. She had never looked so radiant. The crowd was a sea of people faces from the homeless shelters Darren had worked with. There were kids from his art classes, civic leaders, reporters, and donors, all lives that had been transformed by the fusion of Alana's resources and Darren's heart. Samuel was in attendance with Jasper, his boyfriend of 4 months. They were finally public, finally free. Together, they seemed to glow. Elo moved through the crowd, her camera clicking, capturing every single moment, her mind already racing with plans for the foundation's next venture. Kale was there as well, sporting a new jacket Darren had insisted on buying him, his eyes glistening with unshed tears as he stared at what his friend had built from nothing. A small hand tugged at his sleeve. It was Maria, one of the first kids from his class. She looked up at him and asked, "Mr. Darren, do you still feel like you don't deserve good things?" Darren's gaze found Alana standing in the middle of the center he had designed, surrounded by the vibrant community they had brought together. He was hit by a sudden memory of his squalid little apartment, the nights fueled by instant noodles while he watched videos of a woman from a world he thought he could never reach. He remembered the weathered sketchbook stashed under his mattress, its pages filled with a hopeless secret love. He marveled at the impossible, miraculous way love had broken through and found him anyway. "No," he said, his voice solid with a newfound certainty. "I'm starting to believe I'm worthy of love. I'm starting to believe that wonderful things can happen to me. I'm learning that being broken doesn't make you worthless." That evening, they stood together on the rooftop of her penthouse, a place that felt like a beautiful prison just 6 months ago. But now with him there, it finally felt like home. The sprawling lights of Washington, D.C. glittered beneath them, a brilliant constellation against the night. Darren then took out the old sketchbook, the one holding 147 drawings of her, and gave it to Alana, holding nothing back. She had seen a few pages before, but never the whole story. Never the true scale of his years of silent devotion. She turned the pages one by one, tears streaming down her face as she finally saw herself the way he had always seen her. Every angle, every fleeting expression, every single moment he had loved her from the shadows. On the final page, there was something new. It was a drawing of a small house with a porch where two figures held hands enveloped in light. It was their future imagined with graphite and hope. "I love you," Alana breathed, her eyes lifting from the sketch to meet his. "You are worth more than gold," Darren murmured, pulling her into his embrace, holding her so tightly she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "Worth more than empires. You're worth everything. You're the reason I'm here now, instead of hiding from the world. You are the reason I believe people get second chances. You are my entire world, Alana, my whole universe." She tilted her head back as he kissed her, a slow, deep, perfect kiss that tasted of forever. "Marry me," he whispered against her mouth. She pulled away just enough to look at him, her eyes wide with shock. "What, I know this is fast, and I know I have nothing to offer you, not really. I don't even have a ring. I can't afford the kind of wedding you deserve. Honestly, most days I'm still just trying to figure out how to function like a normal person." He cupped her face in his hands. "But I know with everything that I am, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much I love you. I want to wake up next to you every single morning. I want to build a real life with you, no matter how messy or uncertain it gets. Will you marry me?" "Yes." The word left her lips without a second of hesitation. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around as their laughter and tears mixed, witnessed only by the city lights below. When he finally set her down, she was breathless and radiant. "I don't need a ring or some big fancy wedding. I just need you forever. You have me," he promised, "completely and forever." They just held each other, bathed in the glow of the city. Two people who had found their way to one another across an impossible distance, across different worlds, across years of suffocating loneliness and fear. Finally home, finally whole, and finally free to love without any limits. 18 months after that rooftop proposal, Darren and Alana were married in an intimate ceremony at the very community center he had designed. There was no press, no spectacle, only the people who truly mattered. Samuel was there with Jasper at his side. Elo served as maid of honor. Kyle walked Alana down the aisle because her uncle was no longer welcome, and Kyle had become the family she chose for herself. Maria and the other children from Darren's classes threw petals of wildflowers. It was absolutely perfect, but their life together was not always easy. Darren still had moments where panic attacks ambushed him, triggered by a car accident on the news, or a ghost of a memory of Isabel. Alana still grappled with the relentless pressure of running her company while trying to protect her personal boundaries. They argued about finances, about his prideful reluctance to let her pay for things, and about her habit of trying to solve every problem with her checkbook. But through it all, they loved each other, messily, imperfectly, and completely. Darren launched his own architectural firm, a small company focused on community-driven projects. Alana provided the initial funding, but within 2 years, the firm was entirely self-sustaining. His designs started winning awards and gaining national recognition. They bought a small house with a porch that looked like it was pulled from the pages of his sketchbook, adopted 2 dogs, and filled their home with art, laughter, and the simple magic of building a life together. On their second anniversary, Alana found Darren in his home studio sketching. When she looked over his shoulder, she saw him drawing her just as he had done hundreds of times before they ever met. "You still do that?" she asked, a warm smile spreading across her face. "I'll never stop," he said, gently pulling her onto his lap. "You're my favorite thing to draw, my favorite person to look at, my favorite part of the entire world." "I love you," she said, kissing his temple. "Thank you for saving me that day on the street and from the life I was living before I understood what real love was." "Thank you," he said, holding her close, "for saving me right back. You saw me when I felt completely transparent, and you chose to love me when I was convinced I was broken beyond repair. You were my chance to begin again." As dusk settled around them, they sat in a comfortable quiet enveloped by the very life they had painstakingly built together. It was the ultimate proof that true love could defy any distance, mend any hurt, and illuminate the deepest shadows, a treasure more precious than gold, a prize worth more than everything. The final page had been turned. On a scale of 1 to 10, how did this resonate with you? Let me know your favorite part down in the comments. Be good to yourselves, and I'll catch you in the next chapter. Sending you all my love.